The market was alive with noise. Alien voices mixing with the sharp cry of vendors, the hiss of steam pipes, and the heavy steps of guards. Among the stalls, the human named Daniel moved slowly, his eyes searching only for food and supplies. He did not expect his night to change forever. From the shadows, a thin figure followed him, her steps unsure, her clothes torn, her eyes filled with hunger and shame. She was not like the other aliens selling goods or trading parts. She looked broken, fragile, yet something in her glowing silver eyes showed she still carried a spark. When Daniel stopped near a stall of bread, she stepped forward, her hands shaking. People turned their heads, whispers spread quickly. Some laughed cruelly, others smirked as if waiting for a show. And then, with a voice so soft yet heavy with desperation, the alien girl spoke. "Rent me for one night," she pleaded, her words trembling in the air like shattered glass. The crowd gasped, some chuckled, others mocked her, but she kept her eyes locked on Daniel. Her body trembled, her face burned with humiliation, but her voice was steady. "Just one night, please." Daniel froze, the bread in his hand forgotten. The words hit him harder than a weapon. He saw her thin arms, the bruises on her skin, the scars around her neck where once chains must have been. This was not a woman offering herself in lust, this was someone drowning, offering her pride as the last thing she had to sell. The crowd's laughter grew louder. A vendor shouted, "Take her, human, that's all she's good for." Another sneered, "Cheap alien, can't even get a decent buyer." Her cheeks burned, but she did not move. She stood like a stone, waiting for the human's answer. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but his throat felt dry. In her eyes, he saw a storm of fear and shame, yet also a silent cry for help. He realized this was more than survival. This was a test of his own humanity. He whispered finally, so low only she could hear, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Her lips quivered. Her voice cracked. "Because no one will hire me, no one will feed me. One night with you means I can eat, means I can survive." Her words dug into him, sharp and raw. Daniel's hand clenched the bread until it nearly crumbled. He looked around and saw only faces filled with cruelty. Not one person cared for her. Not one offered her dignity. The girl stood trembling, waiting, every second stretching like an eternity. Would he laugh at her too, or worse, take her at her word? Instead, Daniel took a slow breath, his heart racing, and stepped closer. The crowd leaned in, eager to see what the human would do. But Daniel did not touch her the way they expected. Instead, he reached for his coat and placed it around her thin shoulders. The laughter stopped for a moment, replaced by silence. The alien girl's eyes widened, confusion breaking through her fear. Daniel whispered again, "You don't need to sell yourself, not tonight." Her breath caught, her lips parted, as if his words were something she could not understand. She looked at him with disbelief, as though no one had ever refused such an offer with kindness. The crowd jeered louder now, shouting insults at Daniel, calling him a fool, but he ignored them, his focus only on the trembling girl in front of him. "Come," he said firmly, his voice steady now. "Not for one night, not for what they think, come because you need food and rest." She hesitated, her body shaking, her mind torn between fear and hope. Finally, her legs moved, small, unsteady steps, following him through the crowded market. People shouted behind them, some throwing scraps of trash, some laughing until their voices cracked. But Daniel kept walking, his hand steady on her shoulder, guiding her away from the cruelty of the crowd. As they reached the edge of the market, the noise faded, replaced by the cold silence of the empty streets. The girl clutched his coat tightly, her silver eyes still wet with unshed tears. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Why did you help me, human? Why didn't you take me like the others would have?" Daniel looked at her, his voice low but certain. "Because I am not like them." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever, hope. And yet, even as they walked into the shadows, unseen eyes followed. Men who had laughed before now whispered to each other, anger rising in their voices. The alien girl had dared to survive, and the human had dared to care. The desperate plea had been made, but its echo was only beginning to change everything. The night air was colder as Daniel led the alien girl through the narrow alleys, the city lights flickering above them like broken stars. Her bare feet scraped against the cracked pavement. But she said nothing, only held his coat tighter around her trembling body. Every few steps she glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to drag her back. Yet Daniel's steady pace gave her a strange sense of safety. At last they reached a small building on the edge of the human quarter. Its door rusted, its walls worn, but inside it was quiet. Daniel unlocked the door and guided her in, the soft click shutting out the world's cruel laughter. The room was simple, an old table, a narrow bed, and shelves filled with tools and spare parts. But to her it felt like another world. She stood frozen, afraid to move, her silver eyes wide as if expecting chains to fall from the ceiling. Daniel placed the bread on the table, poured a cup of water from a metal jug, and nodded for her to sit. Her legs trembled as she lowered herself, her hands hovering over the bread but not daring to touch it. "Eat," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying no command, only concern. The girl stared at him, disbelief written across her face. No one had ever told her to eat without demanding something in return. Slowly, she tore a piece of the bread, her thin fingers shaking. The first bite made her eyes close, tears slipping down her cheeks as the taste filled her mouth. Daniel watched in silence, his chest heavy, realizing she had been starving far longer than he guessed. She ate like someone afraid the food would vanish if she slowed down. Daniel placed another piece in front of her, then another, until finally she leaned back, breathless. Her lips moved as if to thank him, but no words came, her voice lost in the weight of gratitude. The silence in the room grew thick, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. The girl's gaze lingered on the bed, then flicked to Daniel, her body stiffening. She whispered, "Do you want me?" Now, Daniel's heart sank at her question. He shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "I brought you here to rest, not to be used." Her eyes widened again, shock carving deep lines across her face. She pulled his coat tighter, confused. "Then why bring me here?" Daniel's voice softened. "Because you asked for help. Not because of the words you were forced to use." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze steady. "You needed safety tonight, so I gave it." Her lips trembled, her hands clutching the fabric at her chest. She lowered her eyes, whispering, "No one gives without taking. Not where I come from." The weight of her words filled the room, pressing against Daniel's heart like iron. He said nothing, letting the silence speak for him. The girl shifted slowly toward the bed, hesitating, waiting for him to stop her. But Daniel only nodded. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Her body shook as she lay down, her head sinking into the thin pillow. Her eyes never left him, half expecting betrayal, yet exhaustion dragged her closer to sleep. Daniel sat by the table, his hands clasped, his thoughts storming. He thought of her trembling voice in the market, of the cruel laughter of the crowd. He thought of the scars on her neck, the bruises on her arms, and he wondered how many others like her were forced to beg with words meant to shame them. Outside, footsteps passed by, shadows moving along the thin window. Daniel's hand reached instinctively toward the old blade on the shelf. But the sound faded, leaving only silence once more. The alien girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring broken words. Her voice cracked with fear, whispering pleas in a language Daniel did not know. He clenched his fists, knowing even her dreams were prisons. Hours passed slowly, the dim lamp burning low. Daniel did not sleep, his eyes fixed on the door, his mind heavy with questions. Why had he stepped forward in the market? Why had her plea struck him so deeply when dawn finally touched the window with pale light? The girl opened her eyes. For a moment she looked peaceful. Then fear rushed back as memory returned. She sat up quickly, clutching his coat, her eyes darting to Daniel. "You didn't touch me," she whispered. as if needing to confirm it. Daniel shook his head, his voice calm. No, I never would. Her breath caught, her silver eyes glistening with something new, disbelief mixed with hope. She whispered again, almost afraid of the answer. Then, why whisper kindness to me when no one else ever has? Daniel's reply was quiet but firm. Because you deserve more than one night. You deserve to live. The words struck her harder than any chain, leaving her silent, trembling. For the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe she was not just something to be rented, but outside, in the shadows of the waking city, those who had mocked her were whispering too, whispering about the human who dared to protect what they thought was theirs to own. The silent room had given her rest, but danger was already waiting beyond its walls. The morning sun leaked weakly through the cracks in the window, filling the small room with pale light. The alien girl sat quietly on the edge of the bed, Daniel's coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked at the floor as if afraid her eyes might betray too much if she lifted them. Daniel placed a small plate of food on the table. Nothing fancy, only bread and dried fruit, yet her hands shook as she reached for it. She ate slowly this time, no longer like a starving wolf, but carefully, as if afraid the food might disappear if she finished too fast. Daniel watched silently, waiting, letting her take her time. Finally, when the silence became too heavy, he asked softly, "What's your name?" She hesitated, her lips parting but no sound coming out. After a long moment, she whispered, "Sira?" Her voice carrying both pride and shame. Daniel nodded, saying her name gently. "Sira," as if to remind her she was not invisible. Her eyes flicked to him for a heartbeat, then back down. No one had spoken her name kindly in years. She had almost forgotten how it sounded. "Where are you from?" Daniel asked, his tone calm. Not pushing. Sira's fingers tightened around the crust of bread. Her shoulders stiffened. Her silver eyes glowed faintly as she lifted her face, the light reflecting the storm inside her. "I was born in the mines," she whispered, her voice flat. "I never saw the sky until I was 10. Daniel froze, his chest tightening as her words painted pictures he wished he could erase. She continued, each word trembling. "My people, we were taken, forced to dig, treated like tools, not lives." Her hands trembled, her voice cracked. When one broke, they were discarded. When one cried, they were beaten. When one begged, they were silenced. Daniel clenched his fists. Under the table, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing, letting her spill the poison she had carried alone for too long. Sira swallowed hard, her eyes clouded. "I learned early that kindness is a lie, that survival is the only truth." She touched the faint scars on her neck, the marks where chains once dug deep. "When I grew older, the guards found new uses for me." Her voice broke, her body shook. Not work, not digging, but other things. Daniel's heart sank. Fury burned hot in his chest, but he forced his hands to stay still. He wanted to storm the galaxy and tear apart those who had touched her, but now was not the time. Now was the moment to listen. Sira wiped at her tears roughly, ashamed to show, weakness yet unable to stop. "When I escaped the mines, I thought freedom meant life," she said, her tone bitter. "But the city laughed at me. They called me useless, trash, unclean." Her voice lowered, almost breaking. "So I sold what little they valued one night at a time, each time losing more of myself." She looked at Daniel then, her silver eyes burning. "That's why I pleaded with you, human, because I had nothing else left to give." The room was heavy, the silence pressing down on both of them. Daniel met her gaze without flinching, his voice steady. "You gave more than you know." Sira blinked, confused, her lips parting slightly. "What do you mean?" "You gave me truth," Daniel whispered. "And truth is heavier than chains." His words cut through the air, not with pity, but with weight. Sira's breath caught, her chest rising sharply. She was not used to being heard, truly heard. Her voice trembled. "And what will you do?" "With that truth," Daniel's answer came firm, without hesitation. "I'll carry it so you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Sierra's hands shook again, but this time not from fear, from something unfamiliar, something close to hope. Yet as the moment settled between them, a sharp sound broke it. A stone clattering against the window, followed by cruel laughter from outside. Daniel moved quickly, pushing the curtain aside just enough to glimpse shadows moving in the street. They followed us, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Sierra's body tensed, her face pale. They don't forgive kindness, she whispered. Her voice trembled. The masters, the traitors, they will not let me go free, not after last night. Daniel turned back to her, determination in his eyes. They'll have to go through me first, he said firmly. Sierra's lips trembled, torn between fear and disbelief. Why would you risk yourself for me? I am nothing to you. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but burning with conviction. Because you are not nothing, Sierra, and I refuse to live in a world that treats you as if you are. Her breath caught again, her heart pounding, the words hitting harder than any weapon. In her chest, something fragile and long buried stirred, something she had thought was dead. Outside, the laughter faded, but the danger did not. The men who mocked in the market were watching, waiting, whispering of punishment. Daniel knew their silence was only the calm before the storm. But in that silent room, in that fragile dawn, Sierra had spoken her past, and Daniel had made an unspoken vow that her story would not end the way it began, not while he still had breath to fight for her. The streets outside were restless, voices rising and falling like a storm waiting to break. Daniel could feel the tension in the air. Every shadow seemed alive. Every echo carried a threat. Inside the small room, Sierra sat with her knees pulled close, her silver eyes locked on the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. They know you helped me, she whispered, her voice heavy with fear. Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw set. Let them know, he replied, but Sierra shook her head. You don't understand, they don't forgive kindness. To them I am property, and you stole from them. The words cut deep. Daniel felt anger rise hot inside him. He had not thought of her as property, not even for a second, but the world around them clearly did. He clenched his fists, his heart heavy with the thought that saving her had made her a target once again. A knock came at the door, sharp, deliberate, too calm to be a stranger. Sierra gasped, her body trembling. Daniel signaled her to stay silent as he moved carefully to the door. When he opened it slightly, a man stood outside, tall, dressed in dark robes, his eyes gleaming with greed. I come with an offer, the man said smoothly, his voice like oil. Daniel did not answer, his hand resting on the edge of the door, ready to slam it shut. The man smiled thinly. You have something that belongs to us, the alien girl, Sierra. Give her back, and we will forget what happened last night. Daniel's jaw tightened. She doesn't belong to you, he growled. The man's smile widened. Everyone belongs to someone human, if not to us, then perhaps to you. Name your price. We can pay. His words dripped with poison, as if Sierra's life could be measured in coins. From behind Daniel, Sierra's voice cracked. No, she whispered. Don't listen to him. The man's gaze shifted past Daniel, his eyes landing on her, a cruel grin spreading across his face. You see, even she knows the truth, he said. She has no value but what we decide. 1 night, 10 nights, a lifetime. It is all the same. Daniel's blood boiled. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like thunder. Sierra pressed her hands against her chest, her breath ragged, her entire body shaking. You shouldn't have angered them, she whispered, her voice small. They will come back, not to bargain, but to take. Daniel turned to her, his eyes fierce. Then let them come. They will learn I don't bargain with slavers. But deep down he knew the danger was growing heavier. The city was filled with people who looked away from cruelty, and men like the one at the door ruled through fear. As the hours passed, whispers spread through the alleys. Merchants spoke of the human who had taken in the alien girl. Some laughed, others warned, but all eyes turned toward Daniel's small shelter. Sierra sat silently, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to run, to vanish, to save him from the storm she felt approaching. but her heart ached at the thought of leaving the only person who had ever refused to use her. When night fell, Daniel lit a single lamp, the glow casting long shadows across the walls. Sierra sat across from him, her silver eyes reflecting the flame. Her voice broke the silence. "Why do you keep me here, when you could let them take me and be free of danger?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. "Because I don't see you as something to give away, Sierra. I see you as someone worth fighting for." Her breath caught, her lips trembling, her mind struggling to hold his words. No one had ever called her worth fighting for. No one had ever placed value on her life beyond her body. A sudden crash shattered the fragile moment. The window, splintered as a stone, flew inside. Shouts echoed outside, voices chanting her name mixed with curses. Sierra's face drained of color. "They've come," she whispered, her whole body trembling. Daniel grabbed the old blade from the shelf, his stance steady. "Stay behind me," he said firmly, his eyes locked on the door. Sierra shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "They won't stop. Not until I'm broken again. You can't fight them all." But Daniel only whispered back, his voice sharp as steel. "Watch me." The pounding on the door began, heavy fists slamming against the wood, the hinges groaning under the force. Each strike echoed like a drumbeat of war, the storm that had been building all day finally breaking. Sierra's heart raced, torn between fear for herself and fear for him. She wanted to beg him to run, to leave her, but she knew he never would. And in that moment, as the door shook under the weight of their enemies, she realized his fight was no longer just for her survival, but for her soul. The dangerous offer had been made and rejected. Now only violence remained, and the night ahead promised blood and fire. The pounding on the door shook the walls, each strike louder, each voice outside sharper with rage. Daniel stood like stone, his blade in hand, his body ready. Behind him, Sierra clutched his coat, her breath shallow, her silver eyes wide with terror. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They will kill you, they will take me, I cannot let you fight them for nothing." Her words trembled, filled with despair, yet Daniel did not move. His eyes never left the door, his jaw tight, his heart steady. The wood cracked under another. Heavy blow, splinters scattering to the floor. Sierra flinched, pressing herself against the wall. Memories flooded her mind, chains, bruises, the cold laughter of masters. Memories that told her escape was impossible. She turned to him, her voice desperate. "Please take me again, rent me for another night, let them believe you own me. That way they may leave you alive." Her plea cut through the chaos like a knife. It was the only logic her broken past allowed her to believe, that survival came only through surrender. Daniel finally turned, his eyes locking on hers, his voice low but firm. "No, Sierra," he whispered, his words heavy as iron. "I don't rent lives, I save them." The world seemed to stop, her breath caught, her body froze. His whisper was not soft with pity, it was sharp with truth. Sierra's silver eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, but no words came. For so long she had been told she was nothing, a tool, a body to be used. But in that single whisper he had torn apart the chains still gripping her soul. The door shuddered again, voices screaming threats, but she no longer heard them clearly. All she heard was his voice echoing inside her chest. Not rent, not owned, but saved. She pressed her hands against her heart, the tears flowing freely now. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No one saves people like me. No one risks themselves for someone so ruined." Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing against her trembling fingers, his eyes steady. "You are not ruined. Sierra, you are alive, and that is enough." A crash snapped them back, the lock splintered, the door nearly giving way. Daniel pushed her gently toward the corner. "Stay behind me," he ordered. But Sierra grabbed his arm, her voice trembling, yet fierce. "If you fight, I fight too." For the first time, Daniel saw fire in her eyes. The fragile girl who had begged for one night was gone, replaced by someone rising from her own ashes. He nodded once, a silent pact forming between them. Whatever storm came through that door, they would face it together. The final strike sent the door crashing open, shadows pouring into the room. Men with blades and cruel eyes filled the doorway, their laughter sharp. "There she is," one sneered, pointing at Sira, "the runaway, and her foolish human protector." Daniel raised his weapon, his stance unshaken. Sira stepped beside him, her hands shaking, but her gaze locked on the men. Fear clung to her, but behind it burned the memory of Daniel's whisper. The first man lunged, steel flashing. Daniel blocked the strike, the clash of metal echoing through the small room. Sira grabbed a broken piece of wood from the shattered frame, her heart pounding. The fight was chaos, steel against steel, shouts, curses, the crash of furniture breaking. Daniel fought with strength, born from fury, every strike fueled by his refusal to give her up. Sira swung wildly, her body trembling, but her spirit refusing to collapse. One of the men sneered. "She begged us for nights before, she'll beg again." The words stabbed into Sira's chest, but then Daniel's voice cut through the noise. "Not anymore," he growled, driving his blade forward. The men staggered under the force of his defiance. They had expected an easy capture, not a human who fought like a wall of iron, and not an alien girl who, though broken, stood beside him instead of collapsing at their feet. The attackers retreated for a moment, regrouping outside the door. The silence between strikes was heavy, the smell of sweat and blood hanging in the air. Daniel turned to Sira, his chest heaving, his eyes fierce. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head quickly, though her body shook from exhaustion. Her silver eyes shone with something new, not just fear but belief. Belief that his whisper had planted inside her. She was worth saving. From outside came more voices, more men gathering. The storm was far from over. Sira's heart raced, but this time she did not feel the same crushing despair. She had heard something stronger than fear, a whisper that refused to die. She looked at Daniel, her voice small but steady. "Even if they take me, I will never be the same because you told me I am more than what they say." Daniel's hand brushed her shoulder, his whisper steady. "They will never take you, not while I stand." The night had begun with her desperate plea, but now it carried a different weight. Not of shame, not of surrender, but of defiance. For in the heart of the storm, his whisper had turned her world upside down. And outside, the enemies gathered again, unaware that the fragile girl they sought to break was no longer the same. She was no longer property, no longer a tool. She was Sira. And beside her stood the human who had chosen to fight for her soul. The night air outside was alive with shouts, boots stomping against the dirt and steel scraping against stone. Daniel tightened his grip on the blade, his eyes sharp, his chest rising with steady breaths. Sira stood beside him, clutching the broken wood in her hands, her body trembling, but her spirit burning. "They've brought more," she whispered, her voice cracking. Daniel gave a single nod. "Then we'll stand longer," he replied. The doorframe groaned again as shadows filled the street, torches flickering against angry faces. A voice rose above the others, the same man from before, his tone mocking and cruel. "Human, give her up and you might live the night," he shouted. The crowd laughed, their voices twisting like knives. Daniel stepped forward, his voice carrying like thunder. "She is not yours," he growled, "and she never will be again." The laughter stopped for a heartbeat, replaced by whispers of disbelief. The attackers surged, the storm breaking at last. Steel clashed with steel, sparks flying in the dim light. Daniel met them head-on, his strikes heavy, his body moving with desperate strength. Sira swung her weapon clumsily, but fiercely, striking at hands that reached for her. Every blow she landed sent memories crashing through her mind, chains snapping, collars tightening, the sound of cruel laughter. But with every strike she felt those memories lose power, replaced by Daniel's whisper that still echoed inside her chest. The fight spilled into the narrow room, furniture shattering, dust rising in the air. Daniel's blade cut through the dark, forcing the attackers back. But for every man he pushed away, two more seemed to appear at the doorway. Sira's heart pounded, her arms ached, yet she refused to hide. For the first time in her life, she was not cowering, not begging. She was fighting, beside the one who had given her hope. A blow caught Daniel across the arm, blood spilling down to his wrist. Sierra gasped, rushing toward him, but he shook his head sharply. "Stay back," he barked, his voice firm. "I'm not done yet." With a roar, he forced the attacker back, his blade ringing with fury. The crowd outside shouted louder, their anger growing. But inside, Daniel and Sierra fought like cornered wolves, their backs to the wall but their spirits unbroken. Suddenly, a man lunged past Daniel, his hand reaching for Sierra. Her body froze for a heartbeat, old terror clawing at her. But then her grip tightened, and with a desperate cry, she struck the wood across his face, sending him crashing to the floor. Daniel's eyes met hers, for a moment, pride flashing across his face even in the chaos. "You're stronger than you know," he shouted, before turning back to block another strike. Her breath came fast, her chest burning, but her heart surged with something new, strength. The battle raged on, minutes stretching like hours. The small room became a storm of movement, blades, and firelight, and though their enemies pressed harder, Daniel and Sierra refused to fall, but the numbers grew too heavy. The doorway now filled with more shadows, more steel. Daniel's breath grew ragged, his wounds slowing him. Sierra's arms ached, her strength slipping, yet still she raised her weapon again and again. Then, through the chaos, the leader stepped forward, his cruel grin shining in the torchlight. "You can't win, human," he spat. "She belongs to us, no whisper of yours can change that." His words cut at Sierra, but before despair could take hold, Daniel's voice thundered back. "She belongs to herself," he roared, his blade striking with fury. The leader stumbled, rage twisting across his face. The crowd outside faltered for a moment, whispers of doubt rippling through them. Sierra felt her chest swell, her tears mixing with sweat. His words were not just for her, but for everyone watching. A declaration that no one could own her, no one could cage her again. With a cry, Daniel pressed forward, his blade flashing. Sierra joined him, striking with all the strength left in her. Together they drove the attackers back, their defiance blazing brighter than fear. The storm had broken, but in the heart of it stood a human and an alien girl who refused to surrender. Blood marked the floor, bruises covered their skin, but their spirits burned like fire. Every enemy that fell, every strike they endured, carried the weight of something greater than survival. It carried freedom. At last the attackers pulled back, retreating into the street, their shouts fading into the night. The leader snarled, pointing his blade at Daniel. "This isn't over, human, you can't protect her. Forever." Then they vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence and the wreckage behind. Daniel lowered his blade, his chest heaving, his body trembling from exhaustion. Sierra dropped the broken wood, her hands raw, her knees weak. She stumbled toward him, her eyes wet with tears. "You fought for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Even when they came to kill you." Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady though his body shook. "I told you I don't rent lives, I save them." The words wrapped around her like a shield, stronger than any chain. The storm had broken, leaving scars and silence. But inside that silence, something new was born. A bond forged in blood, fire and whispers, a bond neither chains nor enemies could ever break. The room was silent after the storm. Only the crackle of the broken lamp and the drip of blood on the floor filled the air. Daniel leaned against the wall, his arm bleeding, his breath heavy, but his eyes still burning with fire. Sierra knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed cloth against his wound, her silver eyes wet with tears. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel gave a small smile, though pain etched across his face. "I've been hurt before," he replied, but his gaze softened as it met hers. "You're safe, and that's all that matters." Sierra's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her words tangled. All her life she had been told she was nothing, a tool, a shadow, a body to be bought. Yet here was a human bleeding for her, fighting for her, whispering that she was worth more than chains. Her hand lingered on his arm, trembling. "Why?" she whispered again. Why would you risk everything for me? Daniel's voice was low, steady, because no one ever should have to beg the way you begged, because no one should ever believe they're worth only one night. His words struck her harder than any weapon. The dawn began to creep into the sky, soft light spilling across the broken room. Outside, the streets were quiet. The enemies had pulled back, but whispers would soon spread. The story of the human who defied the traitors. The story of the alien girl who refused to break again. Sierra sat quietly, her body aching, her heart torn between fear of what would come and wonder at what had already changed. For the first time, she felt the weight of chains lift, not from her skin, but from her soul. Daniel's whisper still echoed inside her, giving her strength where despair once lived. As the sun climbed higher, she stood and moved to the window. The city looked different in daylight, the shadows weaker, the walls less threatening. She turned back to Daniel, her voice trembling but strong. I don't want to hide anymore. Daniel raised his brow, surprised, but he saw the fire in her silver eyes. You don't have to, he said softly, but it won't be easy. They'll come again, maybe stronger. Sierra nodded slowly. Let them come. I'm tired of living as if I'm already dead. Her words carried a power she had never known. Daniel felt pride rise inside him. Not for himself, but for the girl who had stood beside him in the storm. Sierra was no longer the trembling voice in the market. She was something more, something reborn. She walked closer, kneeling in front of him, her eyes locked with his. You whispered to me that I deserve to live, she said, her voice breaking. Then whisper it again, because I want to believe it forever. Daniel leaned forward, his lips close to her ear, his voice firm. Stay forever, Sierra, not as mine but as yourself. Her tears spilled freely, her chest aching with emotion she had buried for years. In that whisper was not possession, not pity, but choice. And for the first time she realized her life could be more than survival, more than nights sold to strangers. The door creaked in the morning breeze, the city beginning to wake. Daniel stood slowly, his body weak but unbroken. Sierra rose beside him, her hand slipping into his, not as a plea for protection, but as a choice to walk beside him. They stepped outside together, the sun casting long shadows across the street. People stared, whispers spreading quickly, some with mockery, some with awe. But Sierra did not lower her head. She did not shrink back. She walked tall, Daniel at her side. For every cruel eye there was a softer one, hidden behind windows, watching. Other broken souls saw her and felt something stir. Hope that perhaps they too could rise. Her defiance became more than her own. It became a spark. Daniel squeezed, her hand gently, his whisper steady. They can mock, they can threaten, but they cannot break what you have already rebuilt. Sierra's chest swelled, her silver eyes glowing in the light. She whispered back, not anymore. Together they walked toward the edge of the city, leaving behind the ruins of fear. The road ahead was uncertain, danger still waited, but they no longer walked alone. They walked as two souls bound not by chains, but by whispers of freedom. The desperate plea in the market had started everything, a plea for one night, born of hunger, shame, and despair. But it had ended here, with a new dawn, a new life, and a whisper that changed her world forever. And as the sun rose higher, casting light across their path, Sierra realized that she was no longer a shadow, no longer property. She was free because one human had stayed when everyone else had turned away.